Hello, everyone. I can't believe I'm sitting down to film this, but I am going to be talking about the return of the Swedish pop mega group ABBA, their latest album, their ninth overall, and their final record, as they have all conclusively said to us, Voyage. This album has been teased as a smaller project, possibly just one or two songs, way back as early as 2018, when Benny, Björn, Agneta, and Anni-Frid, who are the four members of this group, the two vocalists being the women, whereas the men do backing vocals and production. They came back to the studio in Stockholm and decided to write two songs as a little reunion get-together project. Nothing ever came of that reunion, and the years kept creeping by, and we all started to wonder, was this reunion ever going to come to fruition in a full studio-length project? Were they ever going to put out any new songs? But then it turns out they decided, you know what, we had so much fun, let's make a full-length record. And they recorded 10 songs in forming this final project for them called Voyage. And so they decided to put this album out. I have a feeling they also wanted to put it out this year, considering this year is 40 years since their last record. 40 years is quite a gap. You know, we have some artists take quite some time to put out albums. For example, on November 5th, which was when this album came out, we also had another return of a legendary 20th century pop artist in Diana Ross return with a new record after technically 15 years, though you could argue it really was closer to 21 years as her last real original material project came out in 1999. So we had a big gap for Miss Diana Ross as well as a return to releasing an album on Friday, but ABBA's wait definitely trumps that. 40 years is a ridiculously long time to not put out an album. And it's quite remarkable that they've decided to do this project. They are all now in their 70s. They are the definition of baby boomers who I think, you know, my parents were always huge ABBA fans. They played ABBA for me as a kid. I was a big fan of their Arrival CD, which I still think is their best album to date. And so when I found out about this project, I mean, I was also, of course, a big sucker for the Meryl Streep, ABBA, the Mamma Mia movies, which, of course, repopularized their music for a new generation. A lot of their hits are doing really well on streaming. ABBA hasn't gone anywhere in terms of fan appeal. So the fans were begging, the masses were begging, and they delivered. But is this project really that exciting for the average listener, considering this was sort of a love letter to the longtime ABBA fans? Is it going to satisfy the general public? That is a question that leaves a lot up in the air, as we've got a lot of different publications kind of saying different sentiments about how they feel about this project. The Guardian being, I think, the most scathing in their 2-star review, which I think was quite poignant in parts, and it definitely made me sort of look at the lyrics and the whole project in a different way after first listen. But other publications have been a lot kinder to this group. Let's be real honest up from the jump. Were we expecting anything close to an album of the year sort of quality material for this project? That was certainly never the case. I mean, this was obviously a record that was meant to be a swan song sort of special little tribute project to the fans, to create a reason to give a live performance again, though this live performance is not exactly going to be live, as they are going to be performing as digital avatars of themselves, aged back about 30 years or so, which is going to be a very interesting experimental way to tackle the aging process. I know that Anni-Frid and Agneta in particular are not a big fan of being out in the spotlight anymore. There's a reason why you don't see them in as many interviews as Benny and Björn. But I do think it is interesting that they are choosing to kind of have us remember them as they were when they were in the 70s and 80s. They don't want to look like their current age, which I can understand. They've, spent so long away from their music, and their music always did have a bit more of a youthful energy to it that showing us as, gray-haired older people might not exactly fit the overall vibe or aesthetic. It's actually quite interesting because on several of these songs, I have a real hard time believing that Anni-Frid and Agneta's vocals are actually of a 70-year-old's. There are a couple songs, Just a Notion in particular, that I am certain are just old demo tracks that they refurbished with vocals from the 70s that are them when they're in their 20s, 30s singing, and they just decided to put it out today. There's just a lack of deepness and sort of that older timbre to their voice on some of those songs. Other songs, I think you can tell that they are singing in their 70s with the heavy auto-tune use to kind of help keep the melody lines cleaner, which I, understand why they chose to do it. I do think it gets a little cringe in a few spots, but what are you going to do? This album is going to always borderline on a bit saccharine. It's definitely a, fun family, give it as a gift for your, your dad or your mom. It's like a nostalgic present for them around the holidays. I mean, it's no wonder they decided to drop it around this time. And it's definitely not something to look too seriously beneath the cracks in. It's just a fun little project, and I don't want to spend too long diving into it, but when we first got the 2 lead singles, I Still Have Faith in You, which was the one with the music video, sort of fronted as the main single. A little underwhelming, though it has grown on me. It's a very epic, triumphant, stadium filling, we've still got it in us kind of moment, which is the perfect embodiment of the theme of them coming back 40 years later and looking at themselves and realizing, wow, we always could come back and do this. We finally are brave enough to look at all these wonderful memories we have together to share. We have a story and it survived, and we need one another like fighters in a ring. I mean, these lyrics, it's the perfect sort of football stadium, bring everyone together to patriotically support a team, kind of mood building, swelling chorus that you would expect from a power band like ABBA. And one of the longer songs, which I think the balance of longer and shorter songs does, I think, make this album sort of flow nicely. The other big single, Don't Shut Me Down, I think is a much stronger choice for a lead single. It is the probably most bona fide, polished pop song on the project, with one of the catchiest hooks, blending brilliantly their nostalgic, their 70s synth disco sound, which again, just brings me back to that Arrival CD, and also bridging it for their age. I think it's an age-appropriate sort of redefinition of what that 70s sound is today. They're not throwing all of these extra, electronic production updated bells and whistles onto these tracks, though I do think they are well produced in parts. Some of the production, I think, is a little stale, but that's to be expected with a lot of ABBA's songs running very heavy on this very sort of saccharine synth heavy use of that. But I do think that there's some interesting guitar mixed with piano and all of these sort of eclectic instrumentations coming together on a song like Don't Shut Me Down that gives it that symphonic disco groove without having to rely so heavily on modern tropes of having a much stronger bass and like these more kind of jarring syncopated rhythms. I think this actually is a brilliant concoction for them. And I think a lot of people lament that there aren't more songs in this vein. I would argue that the 2 other songs on this record that jump out as classic 70s bops would be Just a Notion, the song I already mentioned, which is a brilliant track, though I admit it does sound very much like a re-recorded demo, if not an original recorded demo from one of their earlier records. And so it's a little interesting. I mean, you could have seen it fitting easily on any of those other projects if this is actually their current vocal. And then we have No Doubt About It, which amps up the tempo into a very kind of clap your hands, sway back and forth, up-tempo, dance like crazy at a wedding, kind of frolicking good time. Another standout for sure. But when we get into the slightly more mid-tempo, kind of avant-garde, yet also oddly kind of dated sounding numbers, like Keep an Eye on Dan, for example, which is perhaps the most puzzling sonically, that some of the negative reviews might be a little more apt. Dan is this little kid, I guess it's figurative, there's 2 parents who are divorced, and it's just their perspective coming back and forth as they toss like a volleyball this child back and forth on the week-to-weekend schedule. And I mean, I get where they're coming from with the sentiment. I just think that it has this undertone of broiling, brooding, ominous instrumentation, which I think is at odds with where the sort of much more upbeat chorus is trying to take it. It's like the song wants to go in 2 different directions at once, with the melody line and the tempo wanting to be a bit more of an up-tempo swing kind of disco beat song, and the instrumentation wanting to be murkier and a little bit more, which I don't always think works very well with ABBA. I don't really need them to go dark, though they certainly can go sparse and epic with the balladry. I do think Little Things is a little bit of a puzzling song to put, especially at number 3 in the track list, as it is a very elementary sort of Christmas carol for children moment, with even some children's vocals coming in at the end for that, singing about Santa and Christmas stockings. Putting it at track number 3 really puts a halt on the sort of momentum of this record. When We Dance Together, I think actually is a song that I will find an affinity for because I do appreciate the Celtic flair of the instrumentation. However, I can understand why some reviewers call it nauseating. It's a little bit throwaway. It definitely has that village fair vibe with the melody, which is what Björn is sort of drawing inspiration from. So there's a lot to unpack with I Can Be That Woman, which is the country-tinged ballad, melodramatic ballad on this record. They reference a dog named Tammy, which apparently is a reference to the great Tammy Wynette, the great singer that Björn has an affinity for. So this is where I think the lyrical content I've heard and some reviewers point out is not always the strongest with Benny and Björn's songwriting. It can be a little awkward, it can be a little puzzling, but this is not a highlight song for me. It's basic melodically, and I think it drags itself down in the instrumentation just a little bit from something a lot stronger of a ballad like, we all know The Winner Takes It All, or like An Angel Passing Through My Room. These songs, this is not. Okay, so I really just wanted to talk about Bumblebee. I made a tweet that I think is quite iconic to describe the feeling of Bumblebee, which some may describe as nauseating. I do believe that when listening to this song, it evokes a feeling of being an elderly British pensioner sitting in their bungalow garden, mildly medicated, and having nothing to do but just peruse their beautiful garden. And you see a bumblebee. He likes the lilacs. I love to watch him fly. He's just a tiny fuzzy ball. I can't keep a straight face. And I wonder how he can fly at all. A world without him, I dread to think what that would be. And I imagine my distress, it would be a new kind of loneliness. So obviously, I get where this is going. We're making a slightly burrow deep comment on climate change and the need to protect extinct species, to treasure the environment and the world around us, the good green earth. And I don't have a problem at all with them making that sort of statement. I think they need to. I think it's very pressing. I think it's very important. But the way it's done here, it is a little too on the nose, and it's very much coming across as a joke. I do think the heavy synth work, which I think even Enya and Nikki Ryan would look at and go, okay, this is too much. This is too much, is really pushing it a little bit. Though I will admit the opening flute, the opening military flute, which reminded me so much of the opening of Fernando, one of my favorite ABBA songs, had me very, very excited. And don't get me wrong, it's a bit of a moment, but it's just something you kind of have to let wash over you and not take too seriously. The final track, Ode to Freedom, this takes a motif from a Swan Lake Tchaikovsky melody and uses it to sort of give a marching salute to the future and to the past, as this is their final song, the final song they have promised they are ever going to release as a group. If I ever write my ode to freedom, it will be in prose that chimes with me. It would be a simple ode to freedom, not pretentious but with dignity. I would like to think that freedom is more than just a word in grand and lofty language. Odes to freedom often go unheard. I agree with all of this. But in verse 2, it gets a little more. There's some perplexing choice here. If I ever wrote my ode to freedom, being privileged and spoilt for choice, then I fear that you would be suspicious of the cause to which I'd lend my voice. It's elusive and hard to hold. It's a fleeting thing. That's why there is no ode to freedom truly worth remembering. I wish someone would write an ode to freedom that we all could sing. That line, there is no ode to freedom truly worth remembering, there's a lot to say about that. And it's a little jarring at first because it's the cynicism is suddenly jumping out in a way that I think you get a little bit of a taste of in the first verse, but in the second really hits you over the head. And it's questioning, the enigmatic concept of freedom. Björn talks about how it's something he can't really describe, and he wants it to be simple, but he knows that there's all of these different, factors that come into what freedom might mean. Freedom from this, freedom from that it's almost too perplexing to kind of understand. I guess as mortals, we can't understand fully. We don't fully trust that that's what real freedom is, that we're actually truly free. But it's an interesting meditation to end this record on because it's a little bit nihilistic and cynical. And it's not exactly something, although it does pull it down to the individual, the sort of accountability that is there, that understands, you know, my version of freedom is different from your version of freedom, that some of these grand, lofty, you know, statements that have been made over the years have been quite shallow and have been lacking in substance and action. There is that to be reckoned with, but I do also think there needs to be a third verse that sort of rectifies this sort of broken viewpoint. And so it's an interesting way to end it, but I would honestly probably give, like I said, a third verse just a little bit more wind beneath the wings of the sort of sentiment of, if we're marching off into the unknown and we're pontificating what freedom is, let's not end it on sort of this feeling of defeat. Like, I wish someone would do this, but no one's going to do it. And that's how we're going to end it. It's like, no, how do we find our own freedom? How do we march to our own drum and not be suspicious of the cause to which we lend our voice, each other's voices? It's a very interesting sentiment, and it's not one at all that I expected them to end on. This record is largely anecdotal. It's largely carefree. It's largely romantic. And then on this this end statement, it's very philosophical. And so it's just an interesting way to jump off from. But it's definitely a stronger melody, and I do applaud the production on this one for sort of imbuing it with that sort of atmospheric 80s synth that is just the backing of so much of this project. And overall, I mean, it's a voyage, but it's a little bland, and it's kind of all over the place in terms of, you know, concept and theme. But we definitely didn't expect this to be necessarily an album with full-on concept behind every single decision. This is a collection of 10 songs. We got a Christmas song. We've got, you know, an ode to Tammy Wynette. We've got, you know, a throwaway Super Trooper B-side. You know, like, we've got a lot of stuff coming together in this package. But, you know, they tie it up together and give it to us, and it's better than nothing. And I think that's what we all have to appreciate. Is this album hurting anyone by being out? No. Is it tarnishing their legacy? No. They've proved their point. They have nothing left to prove. They really don't. I mean, what can they do? I know that's a little bit like defeatist and saying, well, there's always ways they can improve their artistry. But let's be real. We were not necessarily expecting their best songs that they ever wrote to come in a random album dropped 40 years after all of their other material. This is a swan-song tribute record, and for the casual ABBA fan, it is going to be a very pleasant thing to listen to, especially around the holidays. There is definitely a family, fun-filled atmosphere that this album can bring to any sort of, you know, patio party or something. I don't know, you know, like a boomer convention. No, but anyway, it's definitely a pill I'd willingly take, especially in today's age where, first of all, we don't see a lot of artists like this return so triumphantly. But this is definitely an interesting way to end their career and to give us one last little glimpse of nostalgia, which we all want. And we all want to view through rose-colored glasses, right? We want to see them looking as they once did. ABBA's always been a bit about that look. It's never been much deeper than that. And that's, at the end of the day, how I don't judge this album too harshly. It's a lot on the surface. So just don't look too far beneath it. That's my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know in the comments what yours are. I will see you all in my next one. Please give this a like if you enjoyed. I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed day. Peace, love, and light. Bye.